Okay, I'm going to start recording over this lecture, so I'll post this onto YouTube and then share that up on Blackboard as well. In terms of your programming that you were just working on, let's make sure that I'm going to give you an extended time frame just because I know this is a holiday weekend coming up. So I'm going to give you until Monday to have 1 week of your partner's program actually complete. Okay? So you'll have not a week. That's not entirely accurate. You're gonna have until Monday to get that done. So I'd like to see that completed on Monday. Again, you do not need to submit anything to Blackboard. Just go through Google Drive for all of this. So you don't need to submit anything to Blackboard. The only reason that assignment is up on Blackboard is so that I can actually submit your grades. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about training around musculoskeletal injuries. So big thing here is that we're not going clinical. Okay, so what I mean by that is that we're not diagnosing an injury. What we're doing is we're talking about if I have an ache or a pain, or if somebody I work with has an ache or a pain, what do I need to do to get them to exercise pain-free? So this is going to be very different. Let's say that you had someone with a torn rotator cuff. We're not trying to fix that, but perhaps the question here would be, how do I get that person to train their lower body pain-free? So how can, even if somebody is in pain, how can they still exercise? So that's the important question. And again, we're not talking about diagnosing injuries or even treating injuries. It's just how can we get someone to exercise if they're in pain? So as a refresher, if you assess somebody and they experience pain, there's one of three things that you can do. You can modify the exercise, you can modify the exercise, you can change the exercise to a different exercise, or you could refer out to a professional that actually deals with pain. Or maybe one day that's you. You're the physical therapist who is working with somebody that is experiencing pain. So when I talk about changing the exercise, we want to start to think about what causes that person pain. So let's say somebody has low back pain. Does it get worse with what we call spinal flexion or extension? Okay, so some people, their low back pain might be exacerbated by going into flexion. For other people, it might be more exacerbated by going into excessive extension. Let's say somebody had flexion-based low back pain. Which of these exercises probably wouldn't be a good idea to put on their trainable menu, A or B? Go ahead, type it in the text box. Which one, if they have flexion-based back pain, which one might we not want to do, A or B? Yeah, good. We wouldn't want to do A because A is putting them into more flexion. Yep. Okay, let's go to this one. Let's say that actually, let's do this. We've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but based on what you know about moment arms, which one of these exercises, a front squat, a high bar squat, or a low bar squat, is going to put the most stress on the back? So we can say A, B, or C. Which one's going to put the most stress on the back? Yeah, great. So they're leaning forward more. So if somebody is prone to having back issues, perhaps we don't want to put so much mechanical stress on their back. Good job. Okay, I'm going to go back to presentation mode. So in terms of stages of progressive exercise design, everyone's going to be in one of these categories, okay? So this would be what you would be training for. If you're starting at the complete bottom, let's just say somebody is dealt with a major injury. This is probably not going to be in like the strength and conditioning coach's hands. More than likely, it's going to be in the physical therapist's hands. This is where we do corrective and therapeutic exercises. Again, this won't be what strength and conditioning coaches or personal trainers will be doing. The therapeutic exercise is what the physical therapists are doing. Next, we're going to groove, appropriate, and perfect motion and motor patterns. So we don't want to add load onto dysfunction. That's something that as you get into this field, you'll hear a lot more of. If somebody can't do an exercise correctly, we're not going to load it up. And then loading it up and getting stronger is often therapeutic, but we want to make sure that we do that on top of a good foundation. So the next phase would be to groove, appropriate, and perfect motion and motor patterns. The next step is build whole body and joint stability. So we've actually talked about this, building appropriate mobility at some joints and then stability at other joints. So then this is where we start to cross over between what a rehabilitation specialist and more of a strength coach or personal trainer might end up doing. Then once they can do things pain-free, we need to start building up endurance. If we're talking with an athletic population or maybe someone who just wants to get stronger, we build strength. And then after that, again, these last few parts are pretty athlete dependent. We would start to develop speed, power, and agility. So this would be taking someone, again, if we think athlete, taking somebody that had an injury, and then what's the stage of progression to get them back on the field or the court. So I want to cover what I want you to understand is to learn the importance of training stress and how pain can relate to training stress. I want you to learn how to modify technique and exercises to reduce training stress in some areas. We'll do a brief introduction to what's called the biopsychosocial model of pain. Essentially, what you're going to get away from this is that pain is complex. And then probably more importantly is you're going to learn how to design a trainable menu for a person who's actually in pain. So if that's you or somebody that you're working with or a friend that you're trying to help out, what are some quick fixes that you can apply to help them move a little bit more pain-free? So what is pain? Pain is a distressing experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage with sensory, emotional, cognitive, and social components. So this is a more recent definition of what pain is. And one thing that's pretty interesting is a distressing experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So somebody can experience pain without actually having tissue damage, or they can experience pain with having tissue damage. So this was not fun. If you have ever hurt yourself, like in this case, I took a nice picture of this after I accidentally slammed my fingers into two weights. That hurt really, really bad. And now when you hurt yourself, a stimulus that normally did not cause pain will now cause pain. So what I mean by that is normally if I squeeze my finger right now, so I'm squeezing my finger, I'm not experiencing pain. But when I was already in a state of pain, when I squeeze my finger, that is going to hurt a lot more than if I wasn't in pain. So you don't need a high stimulus intensity. So the stimulus would be me squeezing my finger. You don't need a high stimulus intensity to cause further perceptions of pain. Another way to think about that is if you ever had like a sunburn or something like that, and then you went to go take a shower and it was hot water that normally wouldn't hurt you, but now this hurts you because you have that sunburn, you're already in pain. So the stimulus intensity does not need to be that high to cause further pain. This is going to be important for when you're considering training someone who's in pain, because we don't want to have such a high training stimulus intensity that it causes pain, because they're going to be sensitive to more pain. So basically what I was just saying is when a natural stimulus is applied, there's a range of stimulus intensities over which your stimulus is not painful. So again, if I was squeezing my finger lightly, that's low intensity. I don't feel any pain. If I started squeezing harder, I'm feeling something, but I'm not feeling pain. And if I squeezed as hard as I possibly could, I might start to experience some pain. So as stimulus intensity is increased, however, a stimulus level is eventually reached. Basically was saying a stimulus level is eventually reached where it will cause that person pain. Okay? So some of the basic principles of pain science is an all or nothing principle. So one, either you're going to experience pain or you're not. If you don't have pain, or if you've never had pain, you have a lot of room for different activities. Versus after you've had pain, your body is sensitive to more pain, and therefore you have less room for more activities. So this is one of the reasons why if we're training someone that has pain, we need to be really careful about what they're doing, because compared to somebody that wasn't having pain, they have less room for activity. So again, everyone has a loading tolerance, which when exceeded will cause pain and ultimately tissue damage. So let's just say that we have these different variations. I'll pull this out a little bit, but let's just say we had these different variations of lower body exercises. So let me actually go back. Now what I want you to actually notice right now is that let's just imagine that the weight's the same, although it's not entirely. What you'll notice is that I'm having different external moment arms at my hips. So therefore the amount of stress that's going to be placed on my low back is going to be different. So in this case, small moment arm is at the hips, probably not too much stress on my back. This one, you'll notice deadlift, you'll notice that I'm leaning a little bit further forward, so there might be more stress on my back, although we're talking about a little bit of a different exercise. Right here, I've changed the exercise, I'm leaning more far forward, so I'm putting more stress on my back. So even if the weight was the exact same, the intensity on my low back is going to change. And if we imagine this line as being the threshold for when pain happens, we might say, okay, pain's happening here because the stimulus intensity is actually too high because I'm putting more stress on my low back. So presumably if that one causes pain, we would also think that a low bar back squat would also be something that would end up causing pain. So everyone has a loading tolerance, which when exceeded will cause pain and ultimately tissue damage. We can think about the same thing right here. We have all these different variations of the same exact exercise. So again, if we're using we have the same exercise, but let's imagine there's different loads. Let's say 100 pounds was no issue, it didn't cause me any pain, but let's just say 200 pounds did cause me pain. So if 200 pounds did cause me pain, then undoubtedly 300 pounds, if all else is equal, is also going to cause me pain. So if that intensity keeps increasing, ultimately that's going to cause pain. And the threshold, again, gets lowered if somebody's already in pain. So imagine if normally I could lift 500, but 500 pain-free, but then I ended up hurting myself. Now I might experience pain when I'm lifting something much lighter, like 300 pounds. Now, pain is not just caused by mechanical stimuli, okay? Now, imagine that you stubbed your toe. Okay, you stubbed your toe, that really hurts. It doesn't feel good. But imagine that you were walking across the street, you stubbed your toe, and then you look up and you see a 16-wheeler coming at you. Your experience of pain is going to be very, very different based on the scenario that you're actually in. So if you look up and you see this coming at you, you're not going to experience pain. Your body's going to say, let's get out of the road so we don't get hit by a car. Similarly, imagine an athlete that was about to take either a game-winning or a game-losing shot, and let's say that right on that shot they got tackled and they broke. Well, let's just say someone ran into them and they twisted their ankle really, really bad. In one scenario, they make it, they win the game, and then in another scenario, they miss it. Game is lost. So in those two different scenarios, pain's going to be experienced differently. The person who just won the game is probably going to experience it a lot different than the person who just lost the game. So pain is context dependent. So if you hurt yourself, twist your ankle or something like that, that's going to hurt really, really bad. But you're going to experience that differently if a 16-wheeler is coming at you. I have this video posted on Blackboard. So if you want to go through that, not this video. This presentation is already posted on Blackboard. So if you want to go through this and look at these videos, there's actually some really interesting stuff. Right here is an example of giving somebody a phantom limb. So you give them a fake limb and then you cause quote unquote tissue damage to them by hitting the fake hand with a rubber mallet, and they actually experience pain. There's another interesting phenomenon called phantom limb pain, where people who have amputated limbs will still end up feeling pain in that limb that was amputated. So that's pretty clear evidence that pain is not just something that you experience with tissue damage. There's definitely other components to it outside of just having tissue damage. So go ahead and I'm not going to play those because I don't think it actually comes in, the volume comes in well through Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, but definitely go through and watch those videos. They're pretty neat. All right. So when we think about what we are doing as someone who's exercising or as somebody who is coaching somebody else, is that we're really just managing training stress. Okay? This graphic is not going through, but that's okay. So imagine that I wanted to write a program for somebody, and think of this analogy. Think of the amount of stress that you can take as being equivalent to a glass of water. So we can pour a little bit of training stress into that glass, and if it doesn't overflow, it's fine. You're not going to experience pain. So if this was on the left side, if this was someone's glass and I poured this much training stress into it, then they're going to be fine. This is not going to cause any kind of injury. It's not going to be a problem. But let's say that somebody, or maybe yourself, let's say you didn't get a lot of sleep. Let's say you had a really stressful day at work and a really stressful day at school, and you still want to try to go to the gym. Can I apply that same amount of training stress? Oh, also you didn't need that much that day. So am I going to be able to apply that amount of training stress to that person? The answer is probably going to be no. All right, I have a question. 1 second. Sounds like you? Yeah, you can't. There's a lot that you need to think about when you are going into the gym. Like if I did not get a good night's sleep, if I didn't eat a lot of food, if I'm feeling run down, I can't apply the same amount of training stress to my body because then my cup's going to overflow. So everyone's going to have a loading tolerance, which when exceeded will ultimately cause pain and ultimately tissue damage, and that can change based on what's going on in their lives. As you train though, your glass gets bigger. So an untrained individual cannot handle as much training stress as a trained individual. So a person's capacity is the cumulative work that he or she can perform before pain or troubles actually begin. So a trained individual can go in there and they can handle a lot more training volume than an untrained individual, all things equal. So again, just imagine it like this. What's going on in that day? And then let's add pain on top of that. So let's say that somebody had lack of sleep, stress at work. They didn't eat that much that day, and they're already in pain in some areas of their body. You don't have too much wiggle room to work with in terms of what kind of training stress can I provide. This is obviously another reason for why, if you're working with somebody or if you are yourself trying to improve your endurance when you're in pain, what can you control? What else can you control? Can you control stress? Can you control lack of sleep? So what are these other things that we can control to make our training capacity a little bit higher, even if we are actually in pain? And we talked about torque really early on in this class. So how are we going to manage training joints specifically on or how are we going to manage stress that's put on a joint based on the exercise that we pick? So again, torque is calculated as the product of a force and a perpendicular distance between the line of action and the force of rotation, and the force at the axis of rotation. So again, if we looked at our curl, for example, we have the force, which is the load that we're using. We have the force that our muscle is producing to overcome the load. We have our internal moment arms, and then we have our external moment arms. And again, in this case, external moment arms are generally going to be much, much bigger than internal moment arms. So even if this person is only lifting 10 pounds, their muscles have to produce a lot more than 10 pounds of force to overcome that load. There's that example right there. Oh, this is another good video on how internal moment arms change. But again, let's just say that somebody had let's say somebody had a general knee pain, because there are some things that might cause more knee pain depending on the specifics of it. But where do you think that they're probably going to experience it? At the top of the lift or at the bottom of the lift? Go ahead, type it in. Based on what we know about moment arms, where are they probably going to experience pain? Where is the most stress on the knee joint? The top or the bottom? Yeah, our moment arms are a lot bigger. Exactly. So torque really equals what stress is placed on what muscle groups. So if we look at the left-hand picture, this is just a regular, we'll just say a regular squat, versus this one might be something more like a front squat where the knees are going further forward. Which squat on the left or the right is going to put more stress on the knees? Left or right side? Which one's going to put more stress on the knees? Yeah, good. Let's say somebody has knee pain. Which squat variation might you want to try? All the way to the left, which we'll call A, middle B, or C. Somebody has knee pain. Which one do you think we want to try? Let's say they have knee pain. So which one's going to place the least amount of stress on the knee? Think about moment arms. Which one's going to put the most stress on the knee? Yeah, so A is going to put the most stress on the knee. So we probably want to try to do something like C to take stress off the knee. The caveat now is that this one puts more stress on the low back. All right. Okay, so now we'll talk about modifying training technique. So we're going to learn how to modify training technique to reduce stress on the body. So number one, I hope you appreciate my meme. I like this saying, blank doesn't hurt the way you do blank hurts. So this is, if anyone ever experiences pain, just think this. This is one of the reasons why we do an assessment. So oftentimes somebody might say, oh, deadlifts hurt me. Okay, well, deadlifts don't actually hurt you, but the way that you do deadlifts hurts you. So if you do a deadlift or a squat or a bench press wrong with incorrect technique, that's going to put a lot of unnecessary stress on your joints. So again, this is why we do an assessment. This is why whenever somebody tells me something hurts them and I watch them do it, I would say, oh, okay, so that's not surprising. Let's try to do something a little bit differently. So we want to make sure that we have technique down first. So let's start to think about other things. Here, I'm going to show you a video. This is variations of the trap bar. So I think I have specific questions on this after. Okay, great, I do. So I want you to watch these variations. One sec. So this is like a Romanian deadlift style. so based on that, here's our 3 variations of a very similar exercise. So which one places the most stress on the low back? So let's call it the top left A, middle B, and then bottom right C. Which one places the most stress on the low back?
Are you done teaching?
No, I'm still teaching. Yeah.
When you're done, do you want to come shoot arrows with us?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So yes, because look at the moment arms and the stress that's going to be placed on the low back, and the answer is going to be A. So the top left one. What about which one's going to place the least stress on the low back? A, B, or C? Least stress on the low back. Yep, C. Okay. Which one do you think is going to put the most stress on the knees? Not that any of these variations put a ton of stress on the knees, but which one do you think is going to place the most stress on the knees? Yeah, which one's going to place the least stress on the knees? Yep. I think A as well. All right. Now I'm going to show you some variations of a squat, and then we'll ask similar questions. So we got a front squat first. Back squat. Low bar back squat. All right. So which one of these is going to place the most stress on the low back? A, B, or C? Yep. Good. Okay, which one of these is going to place the least stress on the knees? The least amount of stress on the knees. So C is going to place the least amount of stress on the knees. smallest moment arm at the knees compared to the other two. All things equal if the weight is equal. Okay, so now we're going to do a brief introduction to the biopsychosocial model of pain. Basically, you're going to understand that pain is complex. So we've already kind of established that tissue damage or the stress that you put on your joints can actually cause pain, can be a cause of pain. But we've also identified that pain can be experienced differently, even if the stimulus is exactly the same. So think with that 16-wheeler coming at you. We've also identified that some people can experience pain even if they don't have a limb, phantom limb pain. So if I don't have a right arm, but I'm still feeling pain in my right arm, that's phantom limb pain. So that can't actually be tissue damage that's causing the issue. Okay? So it's not just tissue damage, it's not just mechanical stress that causes pain. There's other things that cause pain. So you probably have heard of what's called the placebo effect. Now the placebo effect, when you hear that term, sorry, one sec. So the more you bend is less stress on the knee. So if the external moment arm at the knee is bigger, that puts more stress on the knee versus there's not, when you push your butt back and lean forward a lot, there's not really an external moment arm at the knees, so biomechanically you're placing less stress on that joint. Okay, so you've probably heard of this. It's called the placebo effect. The placebo effect just means an inert substance, so something that shouldn't do anything, that causes positive effects. So an inert substance that causes positive effects. Now, you've probably not heard of, it's called the nocebo effect. The nocebo effect is a harmless thing that causes harm because you believe it's harmful. So this is like the opposite of the placebo effect. Words technically are a harmless thing. But when you get into a position where you tell people that they're probably going to get hurt doing something, or for example, if a doctor tells you if you do deadlifts that will blow out your back, that's a nocebo, where something that is harmless causes you harm because you believe it's harmless. So you might experience something called fear avoidance. So a lot of times you might hear people say things like, you'll throw out your back, you're imbalanced, you have bad posture, that will cause you pain. Those are all words that can cause problems. So imagine two people. Imagine somebody that has an injury. They both experience pain, but one person doesn't have fear. So they recognize it. They don't overreact to the injury. They accept the injury and they work towards recovery and they do all the smart things that they're supposed to be doing. Versus somebody else that experiences pain and then they catastrophize it. So that means they're essentially freaking out about it. They get pain-related fear. So maybe now they're afraid to do exercise. So they avoid things. When they avoid things, they just use it. So they experience atrophy and other problems associated with being sedentary. And then that makes them more likely actually to injure themselves again. So in terms of pain, think about how you react to pain in two different ways. Here's one metaphor that I've heard is the burglar versus the pizza guy. So imagine that you hear a knock on your door at night. Okay, let's just imagine that that's pain. Okay, and if you think that it's a burglar at your door, you're gonna freak out probably. You're gonna start to catastrophize, and you're gonna react entirely differently to that knock than somebody that imagines it's just a pizza guy. This is just a normal thing that happens. So if you can understand that pain is not just this bad thing, it's therapeutic. It's your body telling you what you should be doing or what you should stop doing. So it's important that when that stimulus is actually encountered, you're not essentially, for lack of a better word, freaking out and overreacting. Because there is that psychological component to pain. Okay, so this part is perhaps probably the more applicable part for all of you. which is to learn how to design a trainable menu for a person who actually has pain. Maybe that's even you. Okay. So there are a variety of ways to do the quote-unquote same exercise. So for example, I showed you 3 different ways that you can do squats, 3 different ways that you can do deadlifts. So those are all deadlifts, but there's different ways to do it. Now, some principles that we need to think about is that we want to work around pain and not actually through it. So we don't want to do exercises that cause further pain. So if we want to work around pain and not through it, what are some ways to train the same muscle groups? So to train muscle groups without actually causing pain. So if we start out with low back pain, so low back pain is complex. A lot of low back pain has a non-specific etiology, which means we don't know why it happened to that individual. And this would be non-specific low back pain. So it's pain and discomfort localized below the costal margins and above the inferior gluteal folds, with and without leg pain. This is just the definition of low back pain. And again, it can be non-specific or specific. So what are the recommendations for training if you experience low back pain? First recommendation is that exercise is going to be more effective than just resting. Training frequency should be 1 to 2 times per week with light to moderate intensities, with 1 set per exercise for 8 to 12 reps. One thing a PT had told me that stuck with me is that if he's working with somebody that has low back pain, he would much rather have them come back a couple days later and say, that was fine, I could have done a lot more, than providing them with too much training stimulus and having them be in a lot of pain the next day. So what can we do to manage stress in the low back? One thing you've actually already learned and you've practiced in this class is to try more unilateral based exercises. So single leg exercises are great for training the lower body without putting so much stress on the low back. So that's one thing that we can do. We'll go into examples of that, although you've already had a lot of examples of that. We want to avoid ranges of motion that cause issues. So for example, anything that causes excessive flexion or extension, depending on where the pain is. And we want to avoid end range of motions on the spine. So that might mean for somebody going really, really low in a squat where they end up going into flexion, that's probably a no-no. So what are some of the best exercises to train the lower body around low back pain? So I think lunges and lunge variations are all going to be great examples of exercises that you can do, specifically because there's not really spinal loading and you're not leaning forward. Other great exercises, rear leg elevated squats, and some of their variations, which you saw. Sled pushes and sled back pedals are also great ways to train the low back if somebody has an injury. So I'll go through a few examples of each of these. So here would be an example of a sled back pedal, hooking up a TRX, pulling a sled back. So again, training the legs with no load.
So it's going to be a back pedal. And this type of sled, it's an easy setup. All we got to do is latch it in like that. Some other sleds, you might be able to attach it around to here, but more than a few of them will have a clip-on attachment like that. Keep your arms bent or straight, either one's fine.
So that's sled back pedal. Sled pushes are going to be another great exercise that you can do. Again, we're not really loading up the spine at all on this, but we're certainly training the low body. This again is only if you have access to this kind of stuff. So sled push, again, not loading up the spine. Sled back pedals. So for this is great. It's essentially like a leg extension.
Into a position where you're basically doing a semi-squat.
So essentially you just go one leg at a time. So that's a sled leg extension. Go back. Single leg training exercises, again, they're going to be great just because you can load it up and you're just going to be focusing on one leg. So great for training the lower body without placing too much stress on the spine. And I don't think I need you to answer this question because you already did this for an assignment, but what are some other single leg exercises that can be loaded that don't put a lot of stress on the spine? So you actually already did all that. All right, so now let's talk about training around knee pain. So here are just some examples of things. Let's say someone has knee pain when they go below 90 degrees on a squat. Well, what would you do? So one concept there is that we can control range of motion to make sure they're not going past that. So controlling range of motion is another way to modify these exercises. You might also have someone with knee pain when they lunge, when their knee goes past their toe. So again, we're really controlling range of motion there. So what do you do in that situation? So in that situation, you don't let the knee go past the toe. Perhaps you swap that out with a reverse lunge instead. So what are some really knee-friendly lower body exercises? So Romanian deadlifts, so RDLs and RDL variations, those are going to be great knee-friendly exercises. Reverse lunges over things like a traditional forward lunge, that's going to be a lot more knee-friendly. Trap bar deadlifts, those are going to be friendly, especially when we push our hips backwards. So when we're not letting our knees go further forward. If we're controlling the range of motion on squat exercises, so perhaps a high box squat, that's going to be a knee-friendly exercise. And then sled exercises tend to be generally just super joint friendly. So sled exercises are good too. Okay, let's think about shoulder pain. So when you think about shoulder pain, I think you need to consider the spine, the scapula, and then also the actual shoulder. So if somebody is in a hunched over position like this, so if they're in what's called a kyphotic position, where their spine is chronically flexed, that's going to influence their ability to actually put their hand over their head. So if you couple that with an already pre-existing injury, then that's really going to limit the amount of overhead range of motion that they can do. And I showed you this example too, where somebody that has more of a kyphotic spine is going to struggle to get their hand overhead, and then you couple that with an injury. So even if you're able to restore some range of motion, when you couple those two things together, that definitely makes that a lot more challenging. If somebody has shoulder pain, this is called the high five position. This position may make the shoulder vulnerable to injury, or may just generally not be very friendly for somebody that already has a shoulder injury. So ways to modify this would be if you wanted to do an overhead press and they have the range of motion to do it, we just want to avoid any pain. Elbows come in for this exercise. So elbows come into the body instead of out in that high five position. In terms of technique, when you look at something like the bench press, let's say on the left is A and on the right is B. Which one do you think is going to cause somebody shoulder pain or exacerbate pain that's already there? A on the left or B on the right? A or B? Which one's going to cause more shoulder pain? Yeah, I agree with that. He's putting his shoulder in that. He's essentially putting his shoulder in that high five position. So it's in a compromised position that's going to put a lot more stress on the shoulder joint. So good work. So some shoulder-friendly pressing exercises. If somebody has issues going overhead, we do things like angled barbell presses. So like a landmine press. I actually put that video up last class. Incline presses too. Those would be good examples of presses that they can do. You can also change the mechanics. So let's say somebody experienced shoulder pain when their arm was at 90 degrees. Well, if you're doing something like a lateral raise, when you get to 90 degrees on that exercise, that's when the most stress is also placed on that joint. So we could go off to the side. So imagine if, again, you're standing at 90, you're standing up, you raise your arm up to 90 degrees. That's where you experience pain. And it also just happens to be the exact spot where there's the most stress on the joint. Well, you can modify it to lean forward a little bit more. So like a side lying lateral raise.
This one will start out
Because
side
in
lying
this case,
into a lat raise.
right here, the starting part is actually going to be the most challenging part. Versus when we get to the top, so this is the most challenging part, but then once we get to the actual top, right here, in a standing position, it's actually the least amount of stress on the shoulder in this position right now. So we can change the mechanics to change the position where the most stress actually occurs. Okay, so if for example the high five position is painful for a person with shoulder pain, let's say that this would logically make sense that if that position is painful, then doing a back squat would also be painful because they're in that high five position. So knowing what we know about that, if somebody has shoulder pain doing a back squat, what is an alternative for them? What are some options that they can do instead? If they still want to do a squat, back squat causes them shoulder pain, what can we do instead? Let's say, and we're going to still do a squat. So what are we going to still do? We're still doing a squat, so don't say something like a rear leg elevated squat. What squat alternative? What do we think? All right, you got 1 minute. What do you think? What are some alternatives? All right, so let's make sure that our alternatives are still a squat. But yes, that would be an alternative. All right, let's say he still wants to load it up. Think about where can I change the position of the bar to not be in a high five position. So let's stick with a squat variation. Sure, let's stick with a bilateral squat variation. All of your answers are correct. I'm just trying to get you to think more. Yes, squat with a safety bar or a cambered bar. Absolutely correct. Those are much more shoulder friendly exercises. So I just sent you a video of what a safety bar squat looks like. Yep. So all the concept is just if that position hurts, just take them out of that position. So there's no need to do that position if it bothers them. Okay. All right. So big things to take away from that is that pain is going to be multifactorial, and also the language that you use matters. So if you're assessing somebody, don't ever make them feel like they're broken. Really, no point to that because you can also modify the exercises, and then if modifying the exercise or swapping out exercises doesn't fix the issue, or if fixing technique doesn't fix the issue, then just be aware that you should refer out if need be.